If you've decided to traditionally publish your fiction novel, you're going to need a query letter in order to land an agent and/or publisher. So today I want to talk about how to write a query letter with clause. A query letter is a key piece of your submission packet. Often, agents and publishers will read that before your sample pages and use it to decide if they even want to read your sample. That's why you need to make sure you've written the best query letter you can. If you're looking for a publisher for your non-fiction book, you're not going to need a query letter, you're going to need a proposal. And that book proposal is very different and will be covered in another video. So query letters are only for fiction. This is Ignited Ink Writing, a channel dedicated to helping authors like you transform your writing so it lingers with your readers. Because writing that lingers gets remembered and recommended to others. I'm Caitlin Burvey, editor and writer. Let's start with what is a query letter and do you need one? A query letter is the letter you send to an agent or publisher to hopefully convince them to represent your book. This is composed of three main sections: your pitch, your credentials or biography, and your book specifications, things like your genre and your word count. You need a query letter if you want to traditionally publish, but not if you're going to self-publish. So let's take a look at the format of a query letter. Your query letter should be single-spaced, have an extra space between the paragraphs, and not indent the paragraphs. Instead of using italics, put book titles in all caps. You also want to use a 12-point easy-to-read font like Times New Roman. You should address the letter to a specific agent or acquiring editor. No Dear Editor or Dear Agent. You want to sign it in a professional manner and include your contact information. That's why you need a query letter and what it looks like. Next, let's cover crafting your pitch. Your pitch is not a summary. You do not want to give away your ending. Think of your pitch as a teaser, like your back cover blurb. You want it to entice the agent or editor to read your sample pages. There are three main parts that you should put in your pitch. That is your main characters, your main conflict, and the stakes. If you're writing literary fiction, you might not have a main conflict, but more like a main character motivation. And that can work instead. There's a fourth element, and that's your setting. This is really important to mention if you're writing something like science fiction or historical fiction. Then definitely mention that setting as well. You want to cover the main characters like your protagonist, your antagonist, and your love interest. But you don't want to bog down your pitch with a bunch of minor characters or even character names. Remember, this is a teaser, so this should be about your main character, your main conflict, and your stakes. If you have a multiple point of view story, you also want to include that in your pitch. Be sure to mention who those characters are and how they're related to each other. Here's an example of a successful pitch that landed Janika Cohen for her novel, Dangerous Alliance. 17-year-old Lady Victoria Ashton wants nothing more than to live a pastoral existence on her family estate in Hampshire. But when her sister escapes an abusive husband, the family starts divorce proceedings. A difficult, scandalous process in 1817. As her sister may never win her freedom, Vicky has no choice but to find a husband of her own, who will keep her brother-in-law from laying claim to their lands. Amidst the glittering ballrooms of Georgian London's high society, Vicky must choose between the boy who broke her heart and the man who loves her now, all while wielding courage and a pistol to protect her family from the masked assassins who begin attacking them when news of the divorce circulates. Tom Sherborne returns to England after 4 years in Napoleon's dysfunctional Europe to a title he doesn't want, an estate deeply in debt, and memories of a violent father he's striven to forget. Tom's only chance to keep his now fractured family afloat is to open London's first luxury hotel. But as strange accidents start befalling his former best friend, Vicky, Her suitors drag Tom into an insidious plot that could ruin everything he's worked for, and worse, turn him into a replica of his father, something he swore he'd never become. To vanquish the forces allied against them, Tom and Vicky must work together to save themselves and the lives of everyone they hold dear. This is about as long as I would recommend for a pitch. This is definitely on the longer side, so if you can get away with a shorter pitch, do. However, notice that this pitch covers everything I mentioned. The inciting incident is when Vicky's sister comes home. The main conflict for Vicky is between her and her brother-in-law and these assassins and her suitors. The stakes for her are her family and her lands. Her life, basically. Tom is the other point of view character. We know that they're related to each other because they're old friends. The main conflict for Tom revolves around trying to support his family and build a life here after returning home. His stakes are also his family and his livelihood. This is a historical novel, so the author made sure to mention the era, 1817, and the location, London high society. That's important for a novel like this. This pitch definitely makes a reader curious. That's the quality you're looking for in your pitch. You want it to convince the person reading your query letter that they need to read your sample pages and find out what happens next. So now that you know how to do your pitch section, let's talk about the next section of your query letter, what to put in your author biography and credentials. Many authors I work with hate the biography section because they don't feel like they have enough writing credentials. But that's not the only type of credential you have. If you're an RN, writing about a nurse for vampires, your medical profession is a credential. No one else could write that story as well as you can, because they don't understand anatomy and medicine in the same way. If you're writing about the town that you grew up in and have lived in your whole life, that's a credential. No one else is going to know that town as well as you do. Your life experience is a credential. So if there is a connection between that and your story, be sure to mention it. Sometimes that can be even more important than a writing credential. At the same time, you do want to mention writing credentials if you have them. If you have a degree in writing, have been paid to write, have any publications, or have won any contests or awards, be sure to mention those. But don't mention a contest if you just entered and didn't place. Don't mention a self-published book if it did not sell well. And don't mention a social platform like your Facebook followers if you don't have a significant number of followers. For example, if you have 100 Facebook followers, that doesn't really mean anything to a publisher. If you have 100,000, that definitely matters. Also, in this writing credential section, if you have a lot of publications, say you've been writing for forever or you are just really good at getting short stories into literary journals and magazines, only list the most prestigious or the most relevant to what you're pitching now. Don't list all of them. At some point, the agent or editor's eyes are going to glaze over and they're going to stop seeing those. What your biography section is doing is it's showing the agent or editor why you are the right person to write this story, why you are the best person to tell this story. So everything in there should be related to the story you are pitching. You're not going to include extra information like how many cats you have or what your favorite weekend hobby is. That does not belong in this particular biography. So now that you know what to put in your biography and your pitch, let's talk about that third section, comparables, genre, and other details for your book. There are some basic book specification details that an agent or publisher is going to want to know, and they want to know these for specific reasons. First, they want to know your genre. Your book should fit into a genre. Maybe it's a cross-genre one and you'll mention that. If it doesn't, what that tells an agent or publisher is there is no market for your book. Therefore, they're not going to publish it. Or it says, this author doesn't know the industry well enough to write a novel that's going to appeal to readers. That's why you really need to include your genre. It's about marketing. The agent or editor wants to know what shelf to put your book on in a bookstore. Similarly, you're going to need to list some comparables. This is saying what other books yours is like, what books it might sit next to on a shelf. When you compare your book to others, you want to pick books that are well known in your genre that did well, but are not breakout bestsellers. You're showing that you have industry knowledge when you compare it to lesser well-known but still successful books. You want to say something like, the character from such and such novel meets the setting from this other novel. You want to be specific about how your book is related to those other books. Breakout novels are things like Harry Potter or The Girl on the Train, and they're not good comparables because everyone knows about them, and an agent or editor might suspect that you're only comparing it to those books because they were bestsellers. That's not a good enough reason. Finally, you want to provide the word count for your book. This is telling an agent or editor that you've written a story that falls within the general word count parameters for your genre. It's saying that you know how to write a tight, interesting novel. If your book is too short, they're thinking you don't have enough plot, you don't have enough story. If your book is too long, they're thinking you don't know how to revise. You have a lot of tangents, extra points of view, things like that are going to make your story boring. Once you become a well-known best-selling author, you can write whatever word length of book you want. But if this is a debut novel or the first time you're being traditionally published, you don't have that luxury. You have to prove that you can write a good story. After that, you will gain an editor, agent, or even reader's trust, and then be able to write outside of that word count. But before then, you don't have that trust yet. Now that I've covered the 3 major sections of a query letter, I want to share query letter advice from an agent. There's one other thing that you might want to include in your query, and that is how you know the agent or editor if you do. If you don't mention that. But if you met at a writer's conference or were recommended by an author they represent, definitely find a place to mention that in your query letter that flows and feels natural. Also remember that these guidelines I've given you are general. You still need to read the agency's or publisher's website to make sure you're giving them the information they're asking for. They might ask for more information that I've given you, or they might want these components in a specific order. Some agents want the word count and genre in the first line. Others want the pitch first. Follow their guidelines to the letter. Agents and editors get hundreds of queries a month, so they're looking for reasons to say no to people. Don't let that reason be that you didn't do a query letter properly. Make sure they're saying no to you because your story wasn't right for them, not because they didn't even get to your sample pages, because they didn't get past your query. Also, pay attention to flow. You want to present your book and yourself in the best light possible. So play with the order of these things. Find the way that best showcases your story and your credentials. The best way to learn how to write a good query letter is to read them. I recommend going to Writer's Digest and looking at their collection of query letters. Pay attention to how these query letters did. Many of them will say whether or not they landed an agent or editor, or how many requests for manuscripts they got based on this query. How do you approach writing your query letters? Share your process in the comments below. And for more videos on how to get an agent or editor and other aspects of writing, subscribe to Ignited Ink Writing, a channel dedicated to helping authors like you transform your writing so it lingers with your readers. Because writing that lingers gets remembered and recommended to others. I'm Caitlin Burvey, editor and writer. To find out more about me, go to www.ignitedinkwriting.com. There you will also find a submission checklist that will make sure you have the correct format and all of the information you need in your submission packet. And now it's your turn to use your pitch, credentials, and comparables to craft a query letter with claws and ignite your ink.